Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we have a wonderful topic. The topic tonight, unsung heroes on classic albums. Martin is at the helm, the Patreon panel is here. Let's get started.
All right, welcome back again to another episode of The Contrarians. We've got an esteemed panel with us for an idea that came from Phil, who is also on our panel. The idea here, quite inspiring. We were just chatting a little bit about it before. But it's the idea of unsung heroes on albums that make the album great. Maybe these aren't all classic albums, but I'm setting it up because one or two of mine might not fit into that category. But they're albums I love, and they're albums that are made great by an unsung hero. So there's a lot of ways we could take this. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. But yeah, so the idea is we've got a record. Somebody somehow, they're maybe in the band, maybe not in the band. Somebody helped make this record great. And they typically, you have to be a music nerd like us to know that they are important to this situation. If you're just sort of a casual music fan, you might not be giving these certain parties credit that where credit is absolutely due, that made these albums so great. So let's go around, and in honor of Phil, who came up with this idea, let's start with Phil first.
Okay.
You've got 3 or 4 examples, right? Just why don't you rattle through all of them for us?
Okay, I'll see, because for some I have less to say, for some a bit more. My first choice, and one of them that came to my mind quite quickly initially with this concept, I'll go with Pink Floyd, and I'll start with this album, The Division Bell, one of the most commercially successful albums of Pink Floyd, and I'll go about it like this. So when David Gilmour joined the band for Atom Heart Mother, one of the issues that came up was that David Gilmour was an incredible musician, an incredible guitar player with unique tone and sound, but he wasn't exactly the best songwriter, not so much as Roger Waters. And his biggest issue, in fact, had to do with lyrics and putting lyrics to a song. And that problem still existed when he kind of was at the helm of Pink Floyd with the Division Bell. And in order to be able to write a few songs and songs and lyrics, he had the help of his fiancée at the time, Polly Sampson, who she's still alive with us, who is a journalist, a writer, a novelist, and she's a lyricist as well. So Polly Sampson is credited, in fact, in this album with some of the most heartfelt lyrics ever written on a Pink Floyd album. An album which deals, again, very much thanks to her contribution, deals with themes that have to do with communication, miscommunication, lack of connection between people. She wrote the lyrics to the song that is considered by many as the best on this album, High Hopes, with, sorry, this is very fine print here, with, beautiful lyrics such as, beyond the horizon of the place we lived when we were young, in a world of magnets and miracles, our thoughts strayed constantly and without boundary. The ringing of the division bell had begun. So anyway, I'm not going to read out through all of the lyrics, but she's written some amazing lyrics here, and she is definitely one person who needs to be credited with the success of this album. And coincidentally, a woman, right? A woman behind this great man. So that's my first choice with Polly Sampson, and I'll continue with Pink Floyd, and this time I'll go with Wish You Were Here. And again, looking at the lyrics, especially of Shine On You Crazy Diamond Part 1 and Shine On You Crazy Diamond Part 2, we have essentially a song which is written in tribute to Syd Barrett, to the great Syd Barrett. And his contribution to the band, to the first period of the band, the psychedelic period of the band, is very much what drives these two seminal songs on this very successful and very much loved album of the band. Two songs which essentially are about, about madness, about mad genius, and all these kind of things that we often associate with someone like Syd Barrett, with his deteriorating mind and mental health at the time. So yeah, an unsung hero behind Shine on You Crazy Diamond and on the album Wish You Were Here was the great Syd Barrett, who in fact had shown up during the recordings of this album, and he was unrecognizable. He had put on a lot of weight, and he seemed as someone who kind of was not there. And this is something that is more or less mentioned in the lyrics of Shine You Crazy Diamond. So yeah, Pink Floyd, Polly Samson for the Division Bell, and Syd Barrett again for the lyrics of Wish You Were Here. And I'll leave it to the rest of the guys, and we'll come back later to.
All right, Phil. I just want, that's great. I just wanted to add the comment that you could say that Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell from Hypnosis are unsung heroes of Pink Floyd as well.
Absolutely.
They do so much for that album. They do so much for Dark Side of the Moon. They do so much for Animals, right? Although
absolutely,
is Roger Waters' idea, but definitely, in decreasing order, I guess. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon, definitely, they were a huge part of making that project, imbuing that band with an extra 40% meaning, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the atmosphere that we often associate with Pink Floyd is also linked to those very intricate and evocative front covers by Storm Thorgerson. Yeah,
very cool. All right, let's go over to Matt. What have you got?
Yeah, and just one comment. I loved, Phil, what you were talking about, and especially the Polly Samson one, because we've been talking about that in the Critical Hit Parader Substack about the influence of literature on rock music. And it's one of the, there's not that many cases where you have a legit novelist who is writing lyrics for a band. And you got some novelists who are also musicians. You got so someone like John Darnielle from Mountain Goats or something like that. And then you've got cases where bands have kind of outsourced the writing to legit lyricists, like Blue Oyster Cult with John Shirley or something like that.
Okay.
But this is kind of a really unique one, and I love it. Just kind of fits in a unique pocket. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, so I've got a few choices, and the first one is one where focusing on people where really the credits, literally the credits on the album don't sort of give the due of someone on it. And my first choice, it's going to be Neil Giraldo for Pat Benatar. I chose Crimes of Passion for this one. He's less unsung now than I think he was, right? So now Pat Benatar gets billed with Neil Giraldo. They went into the Rock Hall of Fame together. But at the time of the recording, they'd done the first record with Mike Chapman, and he's only hired to do 3 or 4 songs, and so it gets turned over to the engineer, and Neil's sitting at the board doing quite a lot, learning as he goes, doesn't get any credit for any of that involvement. But then on the second album, on Crimes of Passion, now they've got Keith Olsen on board, and he's going through personal stuff at the time, and he really pretty much abandons the project. He's there, but he's leaving all the time, and Pat can't get the vocals down, doesn't feel supported. And then Neil really takes over and does the full production, in addition to the other musical contributions that he makes, of course, as the guitarist. He's writing some of the material, he's playing keyboards, he's sort of encouraging the creativity of the band. It was his idea to do Wuthering Heights, the Kate Bush song, on there. And then at the end of the record, he does not get credit for it. Pat says he should get a co-production credit. The manager doesn't stand up for Pat, and Neil comes back with the answer: Keith Olsen doesn't share credits. And so all that work does go uncredited. You really have to kind of do the forensics on the special thanks to, which I think is from Pat's voice, where there's special thanks to Keith, ! And I think in retrospect that's sarcastic. And then it says no for all the heart and hard work for the production on the record to Neil. And it's funny too, because both the manager and Keith Olsen get all capital letters on their credits on here, for where neither one really did that much. So
Nice.
that was my kind of first category. Second one would be folks that are credited, but maybe the behind the scenes influence on it wouldn't be as apparent as what you might think. And so sort of on brand for me, I'm doing Agents of Fortune by Blue Oyster Cult. And of course, this is their commercial breakthrough album. But I'm citing as sort of unsung heroes in this David Lucas, primarily, and secondarily Murray Krugman on it. So strangely, you have three producers on this. Sandy Pearlman, who is sort of the Sven Gali figure behind Blue Oyster Cult, and most people associate with being the producer of and manager of the band during those days. I think he gets appropriate amount of credit for his involvement, but both David Lucas and Murray Krugman are also producers on the album. And David Lucas, he was a jingle writer. He wrote over 2,500 commercial jingles. He formed one of the first commercial jingle studios, The Warehouse. He's at the Blue Oyster Cult famous Swingers concert pre-BOC, where he really enjoys the band and offers to his recording studio to them to make demos. That's the demo that ultimately gets them the Columbia deal with Clive Davis. And then they record the first album there. But on this record, Joe Bouchard's talked a lot about how his attention to vocals during it was really influential. He's singing backup on Don't Fear the Reaper. He plays cowbell, but on Tenderloin, not on Don't Fear the Reaper, but he's adding little bits there. And Murray Krugman talks about how he would conduct in front of Albert Bouchard as they were recording the basic tracks, which was basically kind of dancing in front of him. Murray Krugman kind of looked down at that at first, but realized like that really helped focus the attention and set the tempo for the songs, and says that those are Albert Bouchard's best drumming tracks and performances on the first 4 songs on that album. So, I think he ends up having, really a sort of unsung influence on it. And then Murray Krugman as well, because he's the one, Patti Smith and is supposed to, do vocals for Vera Gemini, and Sandy's in love with her. She's dating Alan, has the relationship with Alan Nair. They're both telling him how it should go and fighting. And Patti Smith ultimately gives just 5 more minutes to record it. They turn it over to Murray Krugman. He records it, gets the performance out of her. And he kind of does the lyric doctoring on ETI to get the right lyrics. And he goes uncredited for that. He doesn't get any credit for writing that. So that was my second one.
Nice. Very cool.
I've got one more, but I feel like I've talked a lot. So should we share the load here?
All right. Yeah, that's fine. So, well, let's stop there. Let's go over to Jeff. What have you got?
All right. Well, I guess stop me when you've had enough. Okay. I'm going to start with Witch Hunt, and this guy's credited. It's the bass player Andrew Colton on the first album, and so as I understand it, Witchfind was their inspiration was kind of Black Sabbath and Rush at the same time, and I think they did a pretty good job of that early on. It's more progressive than really anything else in that time period, in that movement. Not more progressive than Rush, but as far as new wave of British heavy metal goes, they were kind of way out front doing that. Didn't really get them noticed, but this happens. And so listening to the album, there's a lot of interplay between him and the guitarist Montalo. One of them is playing and then the other one does. And so they're
Jeff, are you referring to the first one, Give 'Em Hell?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really only talking about Give 'Em Hell.
Okay.
And a little bit about Stage Fright, but not much.
Okay.
So there's just a craftedness to what's going on there. And the bass is always doing something that's helping the song in a way that, unless you're a bass player, which I am, you might not even listen to that. You might not notice it, but it's making a big difference. This is going to be a theme for tonight over here, by the way. So basically he left the band after the first album. He wrote some bass lines on Stage Fright, but didn't play on it, I guess. And it's right there where Witchfind kind of went away from the proggier stuff that they were doing. They could still put together some pretty decent songs. I mean, it was still well done, but they got poppier. And I think losing him is basically why that happened, because the other people came and went, but the guitarist never left. And I just don't think that, even though I love a few of the tracks later, they just don't measure up to that first album. I would love to see what they would have done if he had stayed around and if they hadn't tried to sell records, really. Of course, I can't blame him for wanting to sell records. So that's and he's apparently still running around doing something, playing old Witchfind stuff and the old stuff from before the first album. That I guess there was a bunch of that too, and that's all on or at least some of that stuff is on a live EP from like '75.
Okay.
But they were together for like 5 or 6 years as a solid group before before all the lineup changes. And then it was like a lineup change, at least one member left every time they made another record.
Yeah.
I don't know if that counts as a classic album, and I don't know if he counts exactly as Unsung because he is credited on the record, but
yeah.
I think he contributed a hell of a lot more than nobody talks about this guy at all.
Okay.
He's not playing fancy bass. He's just playing the right thing.
Yeah. All right. Got another one? How about one more?
Sure. This is going to be a theme. So Dave Anderson from Hawkwind on only one album, again, In Search of Space. I look at this as it's by far my favorite early Hawkwind album. And I think what happened there, I mean, there were like 6 guys in the band, like 2 different guys on electronics and keyboards, and Nick Turner wailing away over there and all this other stuff going on. But the rhythm section made it so that all that shit made sense because you had something to latch onto. And as it's kind of weird to talk about bass players in Hawkwind, and I'm not talking about the guy that I forget what his name was, that ran it for quite a while through the 90s and all of that. He was another Rick player. And, I'm not talking about Lemmy. I'm talking about this guy that was there, and he contributed 2 things. He contributed great stuff to that album, and then he didn't show up, and he left his Rickenbacker around, and Lemmy picked it up. And, well, all kinds of shit happened after that, right?
Yeah.
But so he, in a way, he kind of helped Lemmy. Lemmy started out on guitar, and he said he was a terrible guitar player. He's not a classic bass player. He doesn't play like a normal bass player.
Mm-hmm.
He said himself, he played like a deep guitarist, which I can kind of relate to, actually. So anyway, back to Dave Anderson. I think if you listen to You Shouldn't Do That, just listen to how that bass goes on for the 12 minutes or whatever that the song runs. And if you took that out, that would sound like a confused mess. And having it in there, everything else has context and it makes sense. Kind of like probably, I think Roger Glover kind of did the same thing with Purple. Everybody was everywhere, but Roger and Ian were just right the fuck there on, keeping things going. So
nice.
That'd be my second one.
Okay, excellent. All right, so good to see Elder here. So what we're doing is we're giving basically a couple of examples as we go around. So let's go over to you. Thanks for joining us. Couple examples.
Sorry, I'm late. Yeah, I forgot about
no
the
worries.
time.
No worries. Yeah. So yeah, what have you got? Unsung heroes on great albums, classic albums.
All right. Well, this one is going to be because he's a singer that helped a band, I think, make this album. It was a Scorpions Blackout. Klaus Meine was having trouble with his voice. And so they had to have Don Dokken kind of do all the demos. And I think he kind of helped get those songs in line and order at a time so the Scorpions could release it at a good time for them, because that album ended up being pretty big for them. And yeah, so that's my first one, because
Nice.
I know he did the demos. Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you contribute to the writing?
Did what?
Did Dokken contribute to the writing?
Not that I know of. I think they had all the, I think if it was very little probably. I think they had the basic things of the songs. It was just that Klaus was starting to have trouble with his voice. I think he had to have some kind of minor surgery on it or something.
Mhm.
And so he couldn't do the demos, but they wanted to get the project, keep it moving, so there's no delays. And so they brought him in to just do the demos on it. I've never heard any of the demos. I don't know if they're out there. I don't know if anybody else has heard them, but I'd be curious to see what they sound like. But yeah, so he was, and I remember hearing that in the he's credited on the album as a special thanks. They thank him, Don Dokken, on that album. So yeah.
All right, you got a second one?
This next one is going to be a song, really, but I think this helped this singer Rob Halford propel his solo career. And it was a song on the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie called Light Come Out of Black. And he had the guys of Pantera play on that. And so then that was a really good, heavy song. He's done it a few times with his solo band. And I think that kind of set the blueprint for what at least Fight was going to be like, because this was right before Fight, right after we left Judas Priest, only time. And so he got in the studio with them. It was really never credited with them. It's like not till like years later that I kind of found out about it. But yeah, so I think that kind of helped him set the tone for what he was going to do with Fight later on.
Nice, very cool. So yeah, so Pantera was the inspiration, and yeah, he went and saw them live, and it's one of those situations where he's just realizing that his own band is stale because he's seeing how great metal can be, and so it's part of the impetus for him to leave and do something more creative. And that's you're right. It was kind of the thing for Fight. So all right, so I'm gonna go through all of mine, and I'm gonna probably be really fast with all of them, but I'll just knock them all off because I don't know what number these stop at. Some are subsets of others, but the first one I'm gonna go with is Pi Dubois. For I picked a Kim Mitchell album, Akimbo Ologo, the first full-length Kim Mitchell album, because he's a little more sung for Max Webster. The story's a little more known, but the interesting thing here is he's one of my top 3 lyricists of all time. He writes a lot of the lyrics, like most of the lyrics on the albums, all the Max Webster albums, and a whole chunk of the Kim Mitchell catalog. And Kim Mitchell in Canada was quite a hit. Max Webster was a fairly good hit, but Kim Mitchell himself, when you get up to the Rockland album, that sold 400,000 copies in Canada. So that's like 4 times platinum in Canada. So Pi Dubois, not in the band. He's occasionally pictured. He's properly credited. But the cool thing is, I think this is the best example of an unsung hero in the lyrics department. You've got Pete Brown for Cream, and you've got Robert Hunter and John Barlow, and Grateful Dead situation as well. But I love his lyrics so much. And the big Kim Mitchell hit, Patio Lanterns, not on this one, it's on the second one, but on here you've got Go for Soda. And I also like this one because Peter Fredette, the bassist and the high singer, the backup singer, is an unsung hero in the Kim Mitchell band as well. He's like the second sidekick on stage. He's part of the Perry Whitford or Jagger Richards situation kind of thing, almost. So he's elevated to a personality in this band. But Pi Dubois, love the guy to death. He's a buddy of mine. I see him here occasionally in Toronto. It's been a while now. We've gone out for dinner and stuff, and he's just got great stories. And the other cool thing about him is he went on tour with the band. He was always with them. He was always writing. So he's a very vital part of keeping that band creative. He's a real sort of creative spark in the band, and he was super enthusiastic about their music as well. Next one I'm going to go with is Jimmy Santoro in Ram Jam to come up with this heavy Ram Jam album after the first one. He's not even on the first one, but he's just this breath of fresh air guitarist that comes through the band. We've got him here. Can we get that showing? So yeah, there's his name. So there he is there. And actually he's like second in there, but so he's essentially the funny story about this album. It's a crazy story. I won't go through the whole thing. I've done a whole podcast episode on it of my History in 5 Songs thing you can listen to, but essentially the Kasanitz Cats people at this point almost had 2 bands going in parallel to see which one was going to be the second Ram Jam album. The first one's kind of a little bit more roots rocky and Foghatty and BTO-y, and so Jimmy Santoro is the driving force. Hadn't really done anything before, never really did anything after. He's a Facebook buddy. He pops up every once in a while. He became like a school teacher, but he's the guy in there that basically turned the band into, we want an Aerosmith album. Give us an Aerosmith type album. And so he's the guy in here writing all these really modern, heavy, crushing riffs on this album and taking the band way into the future. And that second Ram Jam album, they only made 2 albums, becomes an absolute, hard rock, heavy metal classic. Nothing about this really screams heavy metal until you put it on. And then it's really quite heavy. And then in that same department, I wanted to mention Jeff Coleman from Mogwai on the Chocolate Box album. Mogwai Chocolate Box, I've always argued that it's literally almost the very best UFO album there ever was. It is so good. It's miles ahead of the only other Mogwai album, Edge of the World. But he's this hotshot young guitarist, comes in, absolute same sort of thing, breath of fresh air, takes the band modern, writes these meticulous, amazing riffs. Go listen to a song on there called This Is a Life. That is one of the greatest guitar riffs of all time, and it is complicated, and it does so many cool things throughout. But Muddy's Gold, so many of the songs on here. This is literally, it is on Steam Hammer. This literally almost feels like a Guitar Hero album. He's so prominent on it. It sounds like a Van Halen situation, but yeah, it's just happens to be called Mogwai. But this Jeff Coleman guy should have been the new guitarist for UFO, and they would have made a bunch of classic albums. It is an absolute masterpiece of a UFO album. So similar thing with the guitarist there. I was going to mention, but then Matt came on, and he's the Blue Oyster Cult expert. But I was going to mention Sandy Pearlman and how important he was. The whole Imaginos saga. I got 2 Imaginos semi-fiction, crazy conspiracy theory books out of it. But Sandy Pearlman is the lyricist on, I think it's 4 tracks on this album. A lot of Imaginos lyrics. He's the manager. He's the creative driving force. He's the conceptualist, trying to make this the most powerful, biggest band in the world. Rock and roll can change the world kind of thing. So he's a real guiding force in here. He comes from the rock journalism, field early on. He's kind of like a genius guy. He's into science. He's into all this conspiracy theory stuff. So he really helps bring that band together. Another bit of a different one I wanted to mention, Porcupine Tree. Fear of a Blank Planet, the unsung hero here is the story, is the concept. I think this is basically the best Porcupine Tree album, but not necessarily because of the music. I think it's because of this great story, about the disaffected British youth. And I thought kind of a parallel to that, going back 2 generations, is the Who Quadrophenia. This is my Quadrophenia book. Again, without the story, this would have just been another Who album. The strength of the concept here, the unsung hero, is Pete's amazing story about the mods. And interestingly enough, it's also about kind of disaffected British youth culture, but from the mid 60s instead of the whatever it is, 90s kind of thing. And then another quick one, The Damned, Not of This Earth. I mean, you may not think this is a classic album, but a guy by the name of Alan Lee Shaw just blows through the band. writes every song on it pretty much with rat scabies. It's got a difficult, complicated history, but they eventually get Dave Vanian in and he sings it. He puts his stamp on it. But if you didn't know all this, you just think it was just a great, excellent Damned album. They don't miss a step. It's just a weird Damned album with this guy who's just there. You know, the whole lineup is even a compromised lineup. You've got the likes of who are the guys here? We've got Chris Dollimore on guitar, Moose bass and backing vocals. They even like take Alan Lee's credit and almost diss him a little bit because his credit reads theme guitar / backing vocals. Yet he's pretty much the guy who writes all these great Damned songs that people really don't know. Part of the problem with this one as well is it's called Not of This Earth, but it was also called I'm All Right, Jack and the Beanstalk, and it had a different cover. So that's another one there. And then very quickly, we've got magazine Secondhand Daylight. I will credit, just like Jeff, I want to credit some bassists here. Barry Adamson with his fretless bass is just the whole the idea of post-punk is bass is very prominent. And this is a guy, who doesn't get enough credit for making this an absolute masterpiece. You guys know I've said this before. I think this record is Basic Magazine's the Pink Floyd of post-punk, and so much post-punk has these unheralded bass lines and spaces where there's a lot of bass kind of running things. Feed the Enemy really is carried by bass guitar on here. And that's basically all I had. I just very briefly, let's mention we could have made this whole episode on Ozzy Osbourne because there's so many unheralded, unsung heroes throughout that catalog, whether it's Bob Daisley or producers on all the latest albums. So that is all I have. We still have some time if people want to bring up some others. Again, Phil, we'll go around the round here. But yeah, this was your idea, and I think it's turned out to be a pretty cool one. Do you have anything else for us?
Thanks. So, I mean, I just have to mention, since you talked about The Who, I need to mention someone who is not really unsung. He's had quite a few accolades in his life, but the British filmmaker, Ken Russell, who was one of this, he was part of this kind of emerging queer British cinema and a modern kind of cinema at the same time as Stanley Kubrick, for instance. And he made a film called Tommy, which was an adaptation of the concept of Tommy, and the music was by The Who. So, it's interesting since you mentioned quadrophenia and you mentioned also the concept of Fear of a Blank Planet as an unsung hero. The story of Tommy served, as the template for a filmmaker, a British filmmaker. So that's kind of cool. But he's not exactly unsung. But the next two people I will mention are unsung heroes. They're not even credited in this case. And for that, we'll go to my favorite band of all time. That is Dream Theater. And of course, probably their most seminal album, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, considered by very many, not just as a classic, but as maybe the greatest progressive metal album ever created. And the two people I want to mention are scriptwriter Scott Frank and the renowned British filmmaker and actor Kenneth Branagh. Why am I mentioning them? Well, the concept of Scenes from a Memory, which has to do with John Petrucci's deep, not religious faith, but spiritual faith in reincarnation and Buddhism, and his obsession with past life regression and reincarnation, feature in this album. And the story is basically a ripoff of the 1991 film Dead Again, directed by Kenneth Branagh and written by Scott Frank, which has to do with this kind of very noir, dark kind of love story, which revolves around two characters from a previous life and their reincarnated selves in the present, and it deals with concepts of reincarnation and past life regression. And that is the story exactly of Scenes from a Memory. And, if you go to some sort of pub quiz with very like geeky questions around, let's say, Dream Theater. One of the questions you will get is, on what text is Scenes from a Memory based on? And that is the movie Dead Again from 1991, directed by Kenneth Branagh. But
Nice.
he's not credited.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I never was aware of that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the
All
story
right,
is
very cool.
Yeah, even if you listen to the album carefully, you know, at the end there's a sort of plot twist suddenly as the record suddenly stops and you hear a gasping, a sudden gasp from the main character, Nicholas. And that is exactly the same twist in the movie, which has a happy end, however.
Yeah.
I won't spoil it.
Oh, that'll give me a different perspective next time I listen to that now.
Yeah. Look up on Wikipedia also about the movie Dead Again.
Yeah. All right. Well, stop there. Let's go around and do one.
Okay.
Maybe probably that's what we've got time for. But Matt, you got another one you want to bring up?
Yeah, I have one other one, which also goes back to the Who. So it's funny, they've come up a few times. So I wanted to talk about Who Are You?
Yeah.
And talk about John Entwistle. And so I'm really fascinated by his contributions to this album. So, obviously, he's a great bassist and is well known for his bass playing, but he's in a band with a songwriting genius of Pete Townsend, but he's someone who's regularly writing some songs and getting some on some albums. But here he gets 3 songs that he writes are on the album. So Had Enough and 905 and Trick of the Light. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting to me is he's working on his own like concept album type thing. Like he's kind of trying to do his own Lifehouse, and it is like a sci-fi story, and 905 is the character. It's kind of Ayn Randish and all this stuff. So like this, equally, I don't know if it's equally, but ambitious, like his bandmate Pete Townsend, had attempted with Lifehouse, and like Lifehouse, it doesn't come to fruition. You get songs that then show up on Who's Next, and similarly, you get songs. 2 of the songs, Had Enough and 905, show up on this album, and he's playing in addition to his bass stuff, but he's playing brass on the album, he's playing synthesizer on the album. Keith Moon's not at his best, so he's the most withered member of the rhythm section that has to participate. But I actually think the lyric writing is really on point. Had Enough, I think, works for the whole album. It fits in with the Pete Townsend written songs. It fits an angry sounding Roger Daltrey, which you have throughout the album. 905 is kind of like a really unique type Who song. It's legitimate sci-fi, which is interesting but quite melodic. And then Trick of the Light, in some ways, that's like it's the best Pete Townsend song on the album from a lyrical standpoint. It's really well written. It's both funny and poignant. So it's the point of view of a John with a prostitute, and but done in a very, I think, smart way. And he's playing an 8-string bass on it that's basically acting as the guitar riff, and it's a great riff. It's this big rocker, but with a very smart lyric. And so I think it overall, given what was going on with the Who, I think his contributions really elevate overall the album Who Are You? So that's why I picked John Entwistle.
Nice. And I guess there's parallels there. I hope nobody's bringing this one up, but there's parallels there with John Paul Jones just a year later in the bass player, orchestrator, musical mind. Just like John Entwistle is with his brass situation. John Paul Jones is there with making this the John Paul Jones Led Zeppelin album, right in through the the keyboard space, etc. So very cool, very cool. All right, Jeff, you got another one you want to bring up, or?
I do.
Okay.
And I like that one a lot. By the way, that was cool. And that idea that that thing you talked about somebody crashing through the Damned for one album. I like the way you put that, and I think that might be an interesting topic. Albums where one guy came in, changed everything, and then just right back out again.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know how many examples of that there are, but it'd be pretty interesting. So I'm going to talk about Robin Trower and Victims of the Fury, because James Dewar. Sorry about that. Cat butt.
Need some cat butt in this video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So James Dewar is one of my all-time favorite vocalists. And I think there's a reason that the Trower Dewar period is considered the classic stuff. I mean, no disrespect to Davy Pattison or anybody that came along later. Pattison in particular did a great job, but Dewar just had it. I mean, that was ridiculous how good he was. But I think there's a difference. There were the two albums, and I just had looked these up and I don't remember what they were called. In City Dreams is one of them. Caravan to Midnight is the other, where he handed the bass off to Rusty Allen and only concentrated on vocals. I don't think those two albums are all that interesting. I think they needed Dewar on bass. I think he made a big difference because everything with him on it, not only it's got with him on bass, not only does it have the soulful vocals and, everything that Trower and his magnificent drummers are doing, but Dewar really, really knew what to do bass-wise. So I think those two albums, to me, that's kind of why they fell off a little bit. They're not unpleasant. I mean, they're fine to have on in the background, but they're not as interesting to listen to actively. They don't really move you, at least for me. Whereas Victims of the Fury, I think, is a fantastic redemption type album, really.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I love that album to death. That's so cool. Yeah.
It's mine too, even over Bridge of Sighs. I mean, that's hard. Bridge of Sighs is great, but Victims of the Fury, I think, is just the best. So that's my third.
Excellent. Nice. Elder, got another one for us?
Yeah, this one is a guy who's unsung hero for a lot of albums, but I'm going to say Roy Z. He's been, Dickinson, Halford. I was also a singer named Rob Rock. I was his touring bass player for a little while, and he produced his first two albums. And he's just, not only producer, but he plays guitar on a lot of them as well. Contributes leads and everything. And so he's like definitely been somebody that helped, you could tell able to push Halford and Dickinson and Rob in these, directions, and make them bring them into the metal mainstream again, and make them viable again.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. He's a guy you can almost like say Bruce owes his career to as a solo,
right? Yeah.
Or his reputation, 100 years from now or whatever. I've often said of Bruce, like he will go to his grave with probably, he knows this himself, and a lot of fans feel this, but records like Chemical Wedding are, people would say that's the greatest thing you ever did, and it's got his name on it, right? But yeah, all along the way, I mean, Roy Z is super important to driving that guy. He's basically any of these guys that you often hear, the idea that, oh, he's the musical director of the band, and as soon as you hear that, they are the unsung hero. They're doing a lot for this band, right? You think of all the David Coverdale lineups, and he's even said that about people like Doug Aldrich or whatever, right? Who come in and just routine the whole band, and sometimes it's and I know this is true about David Coverdale, because they say these stories and it's amusing, but they say he just swans in and does a few vocals and he's gone, but everybody else does all the hard work, kind of thing, right? So yeah, the musical director is often the unsung hero too. So yeah. All right, so let's just get one more from Phil. Do you got one more?
Yeah. Okay.
So let's let Phil close us off here with the final selection.
Okay. The next one I'm gonna go with is someone who is credited in the band. He was a band member, but I don't believe that he has received his dues. I don't think he's got enough credit, and I think that he deserves to be celebrated very much more than he has been. And I'm gonna go for this album by Iron Maiden, my favorite album by Iron Maiden. Favorite for sentimental reasons. I don't think it's their best necessarily, but I'm gonna go with Clive Burr. In my mind, most people, and I remember myself when I was a young teenager and I got into Iron Maiden. I think most people think that the Iron Maiden has always been that classic lineup, which included also Nico McBrain as the drummer, right? And I mean, when Nico McBrain entered the band with the first song, Were Eagles There, you have this big boisterous drummer who's just like coming in with this big thunderous riff, and suddenly he's kind of erased everyone from who existed before, because he was also very technically adept. But Clive Burr had great feeling. He had a great sense of groove. He wasn't such a technical drummer, but I think that he deserves much more praise for what he did. And I was actually watching today the episode you did with Peter Jones on drumming, and you mentioned Clive Burr as someone who would actually play ahead of the beat. And I think that I agree exactly with that. He had this excitement about him, a momentum. He wrote the opening lick and riff for Run to the Hills, which is really iconic. And it has all that kind of energy, momentum, excitement to it. And he has been cited by quite a few, actually, as an influence, including great drummers such as Charlie Benante from Anthrax. And he kind of left the band in a kind of like, there was a lot of infighting and disagreements and whatnot. And sadly, we lost him in 2013, not very old even. And I think that, yeah, he deserves to be celebrated much more than what he has been. So there you go.
Nice. Very cool. That's a great,
he was
great.
definitely good. Yeah, he was good. I mean, when I heard he had left Iron Maiden, I was kind of bummed, I was like, oh man, because I was a fan of his. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's a great note to end on. So, this has been a lot of fun. Hope the listeners can respond with comments in the YouTube section. Just let us know what your other unsung heroes are, or and maybe you can come up with some other conceptual things that we didn't touch upon here, but we had quite a wide range as well. So yeah, subscribe, like, all that sort of stuff. I always forget to hit the like button on these things, but apparently it really matters. So like as well. But I want to thank this panel again and Phil for coming up with this idea. Hope to see you again here on the Contrarians. Bye for now.